Cinderella story. Once upon a time, there lived a poor servant girl named Cinderella. She was a patient, tender and kind girl. His days were long and tiring, full of the most boring and worst housework. Washing the floor, washing the clothes, dusting the shelves and cooking food were the tasks that she had to do during the day. Cinderella was forced to work from morning to evening, without receiving a single penny. Cinderella's mother died when she was very young, and her father remarried soon after. But his new wife was a nasty woman. She had 2 daughters from her previous marriage who were as naughty as she was. They tormented poor Cinderella terribly every day. One day, when Cinderella was sweeping the ashes from the fireplace, they mocked her and sang, "Poor girl, poor girl. Her face is black, burnt and ugly." Even though her stepmother and half-sisters had tormented her for years, she had never once disrespected them or tried to take revenge on them. She did not wish them ill at all. She patiently did the housework, hoping that when she grew up she could run away and start the wonderful life she longed for. One day, when Cinderella was working at home, someone knocked on the door. Cinderella hurriedly opened the door. Behind the door stood a short, fat man dressed in royal robes and holding an important scroll. The old man opened the scroll and began to read. "It is my duty to announce that the king has sent an official invitation to all the young ladies of this land to attend the important royal celebration in the palace." Hearing this, Cinderella's stepsisters pushed her to a corner and stood in front of the fat man. The man continued to read. "His Highness the Crown Prince is looking for a suitable lady for marriage. He wants to meet all the girls of this land to find true love. Please come to the palace on Saturday at 8 p.m. The little man turned, mounted his horse, and galloped off. 2 knights also followed him closely. The half-sisters closed the door and gave a loud shout of joy. Cinderella's stepmother entered the room. She said impatiently, "What is the reason for all this happiness?" "Oh, Mom, we've been invited to the royal party and I'm sure one of us will be chosen as the new princes." The stepmother replied with a mocking smile. "Of course you do, what prince wouldn't want to marry my sweet and precious children?" Cinderella was desperately trying to quiet them down a bit, because she knew in her heart that any prince would rather live alone for the rest of his life than to blacken his fortune by marrying these rude girls. The stepmother turned to Cinderella and shouted, "Why did you stop and look? Prepare the clothes." Cinderella nodded and said, "Yes, ma'am." Cinderella wanted more than anything to go to the royal party, but she did not dare to ask permission from her wicked stepmother, because she knew that the wicked stepmother would not give her this permission. So she busied herself with housework and of course preparing her half-sisters' dresses. The evening of the royal feast arrived. A magnificent horse-drawn carriage pulled up to the front door of the house, and the half-sisters, dressed in their hand-embroidered dresses, entered the carriage with much pomp and show. Cinderella looked at them with great sadness and sighed deeply. She said to herself, "If I could only have one wish for the rest of my life, it would be to attend a royal party and get away from the dreaded and boring housework for just one night." Suddenly, a great light appeared in the sky. A small fairy appeared in front of Cinderella, holding a small wand. Fairy said happily, "Your wish will come true." Cinderella asked in surprise, "What?" "I will fulfill your wish, because I am your fairy godmother." "Oh, how much you have suffered in silence all these years. You have a kind soul. A kind and patient young lady." Cinderella exclaimed happily, "Oh, I can't believe it." But suddenly a frown appeared on her face. "But I'm not ready, fairy godmother. My clothes are cotton and my shoes are torn. I can't be in the palace like this." Fairy godmother said with a smile, "Don't worry, Cinderella. All I need to make your wish come true is a pumpkin." a rat, 2 mice and 4 grasshoppers. Cinderella looked very confused. So hurry up, dear. Hurry up. Cinderella ran and prepared everything that the fairy godmother said. First, Cinderella went to the garden and came back with a big and ripe pumpkin. The fairy godmother tapped it once with her wand, and in an instant, the pumpkin turned into a magnificent golden carriage. Then, Cinderella returned a mouse from the mousetrap in the kitchen. Fairy godmother said, "Great dear, now if you don't mind putting them on the carriage seat for me." Cinderella quickly did this. The fairy waved her wand again. The 2 mice that Cinderella found in the barn turned into 2 servants in classy clothes. The 4 grasshoppers turned into 4 magnificent white horses. Said the fairy godmother. "And now for the final magic." And she hit Cinderella on the shoulder with her wand. A spark rose. The old clothes she was wearing a moment ago suddenly changed. Cinderella sparkled in a magical, sparkly gown fit for a princess. Cinderella looked at her feet. He was wearing a pair of very beautiful glass shoes that glowed in the dark. Fairy godmother cried, "Amazing! But remember that at 12 o'clock at night, this magic spell will be broken and your clothes will turn into old clothes." Cinderella said as she kissed her fairy godmother on the cheek. "I understand. And thank you very much for the great favor you have done to me, fairy godmother." Cinderella entered the carriage and drove to the royal party. As the golden carriage passed through the palace gates, trumpets sounded and Cinderella was given a royal welcome. All the ladies were amazed at her magnificence. As she entered the ballroom, the prince was immediately struck by Cinderella's elegance and the warmth of her smile. The prince approached. He bowed his head slowly and extended his hand and said, "Ma'am, would you do me the honor to dance with you?" Cinderella said with dignity and kindness, "Sure. I will be so happy." The orchestra started playing. Everyone in the ballroom was staring at them. Cinderella's stepsisters were watching this scene. But Cinderella had changed so much that they didn't recognize her at all. Instead, they stared at Cinderella with envy. From that moment on, the prince only had eyes for Cinderella. They danced the whole night in each other's arms and enjoyed each other's company. Many hours left. 9 p.m. 10 p.m. 11 p.m. Suddenly Cinderella looked at the clock. It was 1 minute to midnight and he only had 1 minute to break the spell. He told the prince, "I must go." Without delay, she left the room, passed the guards and passed through the palace. But when she got to the hall, she lost one of her blue shoes. But it was too late that she did not return to pick it up. Alas! The midnight alarm rang. Cinderella did not see any servants outside the palace. Only one pumpkin was not seen in the courtyard of the palace. Even mice, voles and grasshoppers were not seen. And Cinderella, whose clothes were now the same old ones, had no choice but to run home in the darkness of the night. A few days passed. Cinderella was doing her daily routine. And her half-sisters tease her as always. Everything was back to normal. The memory of the royal party faded into Cinderella's mind like a magical dream. Did the pumpkin really turn into a golden carriage? And the mouse to a carriage? Had she really danced the night away with the prince? She had doubts little by little. Suddenly there was a sound at the door. Cinderella calmly opened the door. In front of him stood the same little man. He said triumphantly, "His Excellency the Prince is present." The trumpet sounded. The prince got out of the carriage while holding a blue shoe. Cinderella's eyes widened. And she thought to herself, "So I wasn't dreaming." Suddenly, the prince's eyes fell on Cinderella for a moment. A second was enough for him to recognize Cinderella. Suddenly there was a sound of running and the stepsisters rushed to the door and threw Cinderella aside. The little man continued, His Majesty is visiting every house in the land to find the true owner of this glass shoe. If the shoe is the size of any girl's foot, the prince will propose to her. The sisters shouted out of excitement. This shoe is not suitable. But he didn't want to tell them. So he gave them a chance to try the shoe. The first sister's foot was so big that half of it was forced to fit in the shoe. The younger sister had more luck. He was able to fit his foot in the shoe by force, but his feet became swollen and red. Then it was Cinderella's turn. The prince stepped forward with a knowing look, knelt down and carefully placed the glass slipper on Cinderella's feet. The prince smiled and said, "Perfect size. There is no doubt that you, Cinderella, are my true love. I couldn't stop thinking about you. Will you honor me and marry me?" Cinderella looked at her clothes and then said to the prince, "I am only a poor servant." The prince replied, "See more 100+ stories for kids. You are a princess in my eyes. Our love is more valuable than all the treasures of the world."